Hello, this is Sam Simon, also known as Dementia Man, for my blog for the week of June 22nd. And do I have a special guest? I'm so delighted to welcome Daniel Hahn, who is Vice President of Playhouse Square Theaters in Cleveland, Ohio. And so, first of all, welcome, Daniel. Thank you for taking the time out of a busy schedule. Um,
Thank you, Sam. It's good to see you again.
Daniel and I met at a conference in New York, and I learned something. First of all, he's director of education. I didn't even know that theaters had directors of education. Certainly larger ones do, and I've since learned that. And I've been delighted that I've been several times that it's the director of education that has wanted to bring Dementia Man to the theater. But you were the first, and I hope we can, in the time we have today, talk a little bit about, first of all, Cleveland Playhouse Square, because it is, I learned, the largest theater center, I don't know if that's the right word, in the country. And and you took me for a great tour. And that in theaters like that, and that are big institutions and communities, you do more than just present theater, good shows, and bring various shows like Dementia Man. Uh, but there's a broad educational effort, and they cover many areas, including uh, the power of theater in so many different ways, including in changing hearts and minds and opening eyes to to sometimes the unimaginable or things that people just can't see that way. So let me go back. And by the way, if people go to DementiaMan.com and click on the sizzle reel, they'll see because Daniel, thank you again for taping my show and donating the tape to Dementia Man. It was wonderful. But so tell me a little bit about what does the director of education do? And when I performed Dementia, we could start there, then Dementia Man, you had talked about one of your goals was to invite your board and some of your funders to help fund an initiative that I think may be coming into reality now around neurodiverse folks. So let me, first of all,
Yeah,
turn it over to you. Thank you again for being here. And then tell us a little bit about what Director of Education does and then your work in this field of neurodiversity.
yeah, and it's a great question because when I first started out, I was actually trained as an actor, and I went into this audition here at Playhouse Square in Cleveland, Ohio, thinking I'm going to be on the stage here, and on the audition sheet that I filled out, and this was back in 1995. uh, in the spring of 95. And so there was a little box in the bottom left hand corner that said, "Are you interested in education?" And I thought, I've graduated from college, yes. So I clicked the little box. What I didn't know is that the person sitting behind the table, in addition to the woman who was casting the season for Great Lakes Theater Festival, was a gentleman who ran the education department and he was there to cast the educational outreach actors who would then go into schools. So I didn't get cast on the main stage and become a Broadway star, I'll tell you. Um, but the education director saw something in me that he thought was promising enough to get me a callback. And so I was hired as a teaching artist for Great Lakes Theater Festival that year. And that's when I learned what an education director does because I worked for one. I was sort of the entry level position. I was a touring artist in schools. I would have like a bag over my shoulder of Shakespeare costumes and fake blood and swords, and we would go teach Shakespeare in high school classrooms and work with middle school and elementary school. Wonderful opportunity. But what it taught me was that education programs serve the nonprofit sort of center, the heartbeat of a theater's mission. Oftentimes people think of theaters or larger institutions like Playhouse Square, which you, as you mentioned, is like, we're the largest performing arts center in the country outside of Lincoln Center in New York, a world-class destination. And there's an education department that goes a part of that. So what I learned was that there are mission statements that focus on the main stage, but also part of missions of many performing arts centers is to focus on outreach and community and education and giving back. As my predecessor used to say, I put the not and not profit. So I'm really good, Sam, at spending donations and other people's money, but I hope that in my career I've been trustworthy enough with those funds to use them for worthwhile causes, such as when I met you a few years ago and saw your wonderful showcase in the Hilton Hotel of a little snippet of Dementia Man. And I went by accident, you know. I mean, I was supposed to go see a Journey tribute band that night, but the lead singer got COVID actually. And I went, well, I have some time on my hands and this sounded interesting. And so I saw your show and it really impacted me profoundly to the point where, as you said, I wanted to bring you to Cleveland. I wanted to share your work with our board of trustees, which we were successful doing. I wanted to record your show so that you could have it and distribute it far and wide if you chose. So there was a lot of things that all come bubbling to the surface, and of course, seeing your name in the New York Times every now and then always makes me remember to send you an email.
But
how's it going, Mr. Simon?
And you know it's Sam, but let me add something that you reminded me of. You know, oddly, not oddly, but unlikely, I guess, that I had a career. I was a lawyer. I worked for Ralph Nader. You know, I was part of the Washington sort of political establishment that a lot of people degrade, or, you know, the insiders. And I created a public affairs firm. And we were part of the group that would write policy papers and do briefings. And as I sort of, you know, I did a little community theater, and then I initially wrote a play called The Actual Dance and had a lifetime event, which was anticipating my wife's death from breast cancer. She's fine. And through an unlikely series of events, I wrote a play about it. And I've since learned, and I think you reinforce it, that yes, theater can be entertainment. It can be a place you go to relax and enjoy and experience music, but it can also be life-changing. It can help you see and understand the world differently. And I've come to think, even in political debates, I think that sometimes it's easier to change somebody's mind by changing their heart.
Mm.
And the theater does that better than, you know, a 50-page memo and 10 pica typeface. And what my goal is, just to put because I want to get to what your goal is for people to understand that people with neurocognitive decline and disease, Alzheimer's in my case, can live meaningful lives and have a meaningful role in the world for many, many years. Whereas the very common image, in fact, I still think it's prevalent, that the word itself, Alzheimer's or dementia, which we're going to change, immediately takes someone to the end stage. And they think of this character staring into the sky when, you know, we may or may not need to be in a memory unit or even a senior living for 5 to 10 years. And if we can make some changes in our theaters even, imagine that it's a line in the play, right? You know, there was a time when we couldn't imagine a deaf or blind person in the theater. Now we have captioning and audio description, and there they are enjoying the arts just like everybody else. So there's so much more to do, and I love that you're one of the major people in the country working in this area, and that you've got the facility and resource potential. You know, I don't want to minimize how hard it is, though. So I wanted to get an update from you in real time for others about that project you were wanting to start and where it is, and some of your dreams for neurodiversity. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, it's fun because it's interesting because I was hired at Playhouse Square in my mind against all odds because my background, as I shared, was I was classically trained as a Shakespearean actor. I graduated from the National Shakespeare Conservatory in New York. I went to the American Music and Dramatic Academy in New York City and have a master's degree in theater. I never thought that a performing arts center that, to my mind, like 12 years ago, I thought, well, it's Broadway. It's Broadway musicals. What does that have to do with my background? But the day of my job interview, I remember I was leaving the house that morning, and then I turned around and came back, and I went down in the basement to my son's bedroom, and I grabbed a small little, like 3x5 photo off his dresser and stuck it in my bag. And my wife looked at me like, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm leaving for real now." And then I went to the interview. And during that interview, the president of Playhouse Square asked, "Do you have any ideas for programs for education?" And I rattled off a few things. And then I took out this photo, which was a photo of my son, who was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time. And he was having a summer birthday party. And he had his arm over the shoulder of his best friend, Anthony. Now, Anthony is autistic and nonverbal, but that doesn't mean Anthony is quiet. So here are these two kids, best of friends with pirate patches and hats on. And I took out that photo and I handed it around the table and I said, "I would like my son's best friend to be welcome where I work." And then there was silence. And Sam, like choked myself up. Like I couldn't even finish the thought. And the president of the board sort of rescued me. Wonderful man, David, swooped in and asked me a follow-up question that got me back on track. Because I literally said, half under my breath, I said, "I'm blowing the interview." I actually said that out loud. But the truth is, I remember leaving thinking, well, these people are either going to hire me or they're never going to speak to me again. Because I felt so passionately about this new, at the time, was relatively new initiative called sensory-friendly programming for neurodivergent people. And at the time, people who had, a condition of they weren't welcome as audience members. If you had autism or any sensory needs, you weren't welcome in a theater. So now, here we are 13 years later, and we've served probably 10,000 people with this initiative since 2013, where, we will turn the lights down in the theater about halfway. We'll turn the sound down about halfway, but we'll keep the lights dimly lit. And we'll open the doors to the back of the theater. So if people want to come in and out, they can. If they want to bring their iPads to touch and communicate during the show, that's okay. I have tents set up in the lobby of the theater so kids can come and play in tents and just calm down. There's now like a relaxation room upstairs that kids can come and just relax if they're getting overstimulated in one of these performances. And we cut out anything in the show that might be overstimulated, like The Lion King, for example. They've cut out all the flashes and the loud strobing effects. Those are gone from that particular performance to make it as welcoming as possible. Because now our perspective is, we don't expect people to change their condition to come to a theater. We expect the theater to adapt to our community's needs. And that's where we started in 2013.
Never occurred to me to try to get rid of my Alzheimer's first before I went into the theater. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, but and I was thinking, before my daughter was born, I volunteered at the Cleveland Sight Center and would read, for the visually impaired, recorded magazines that they would have there, and they would I would read for an hour, and then the tape ran out, and they would play it. And I always thought, serving people of different needs in our community is so important, just personally. And then I saw your show, the segment of your show, and was so moved because I'm like, man, this guy's making trouble. And I really thought that watching the show, I thought, man, he's really talking about, well, we did curb cuts and sidewalks for people who are seated in wheelchairs. People were complaining at the time, that's too expensive, that will never work. Why don't we think more creatively about accommodations for people with different cognitive conditions? And I'm like, well, of course, why don't we? And so I remember after seeing your show, immediately going out into the lobby of the hotel, and I didn't know your Representative Milt personally at the time, but he was wearing a big name badge, so I could spot him pretty readily. And I remember asking him, I said, what do you hope to achieve out of this showcase? What do you want? And he said, we want to get Sam's message to as many people as possible. And that's when I said, I think we could maybe help you try to do that. We have a videography team at Playhouse Square, and that's when we offered to say, let's record your show and flew in your director and you and Susan, who's just the most delightful human. You're such a lucky man, Sam. Susan is incredible.
I am, for the record.
For the record, Susan is wonderful. And so, we got to do like a multi-camera shoot of the show that can be shared, that cool sizzle reel on your website, and the snippets of the interviews. We got to interview you and have just some great conversations, all captured on tape so it can be distributed for as long as, you want it to be out there. That was exciting, but we also did a live performance, which was your idea, not my idea. You said, well, what if we do this performance and invite an audience? I thought, oh, you know what? Okay. So I invited our board of trustees and donors and people who have, real commitment to Playhouse Square and investment in the community. They were so moved, as you know, from that performance. And we even had a special talk back at the end with the neurological head of the Cleveland Clinic, the world famous Cleveland Clinic came to your show. And you pulled no punches there either. I mean, there were conversations between the two of you. I'm like, I told you he was trouble. I told you this man could make trouble. It was wonderful in the best sense of the word, good trouble. And so that is all captured on this wonderful video that if, folks reach out to you for streaming, I'm sure that there'll be conversations about that in the future. But what it's led to then is the following year, I was able to hire a senior manager of neurological programming, a wonderful woman.
Love that. I love that.
Joan Meggett is her name. And I found Joan. She was working at a local modern dance company. And she happens to be the person who teaches a dance class for people who have Parkinson's disease. And there are significant scientific studies about the genuine benefits of exercise, particularly dance, for people who have Parkinson's, not only helping the motor skills, but the socialization that happens in those classes. And this isn't a class that, let me see what it is, not what it isn't. It's a dance class. It's like, we're going to learn the tango this week. We're going to learn, a foxtrot this week. So you're literally taking dance. It's not saying we're promising a cure or we do see some serious benefits to people who take these classes, but that's not necessarily the intention. The intention is to infuse the arts and have a welcoming, wonderful artistic experience for people who happen to have various stages of Parkinson's and their caregivers. So we launched this program. We had a musical called A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical, which is sensational. And it was touring the country. And some folks know, who probably are watching, that Neil Diamond was diagnosed with Parkinson's several years ago. So this particular cause had a special place in that show's heart. So we launched the pilot of this program in the lobby of our Broadway theater with all these chairs in a circle. And we had the guy playing Neil Diamond in the show come to our very first event with his guitar. And so he was singing, we had people, singing Sweet Caroline, bum, 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 and getting people moving and active with Joan, our manager of neurological programming, all of it coming together. So that was sort of like a launch of a dance program. At the same time, once we got Joan hired, the next step, which we've been building toward, is more in line with where we started with you, which is memory care programming for folks who have dementia or Alzheimer's. And I found out that there's this wonderful woman, and I have some of her materials here. Her name is Ann Basting.
Yes.
And she's really wonderful. She's written a couple of these terrific books.
Yes.
Forget memory. She has this creative imagination kit. I don't mean to be pitching her materials, but I heard her on a New York Times podcast, and she told this story maybe, I don't know, 25 or 30 years ago, Sam. This woman, for people who don't know, she was like a theatrical teaching artist, what I started at doing. And at the time she tells her story, she was in what she calls a lockdown memory ward in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And at the time, they were doing what I think she referred to as like recollection therapy. So what they would do is they would have people sitting around a table, and they would hold up a photo and say, "Who is this? Jeannie, who's this? Who is this? You know who this is?" And some of the folks would just kind of sit there, non-responsive. And so Anne got so frustrated with this attempt to try to just change people in a way that wasn't natural, that she grabbed a magazine on the table next to her. And she flipped it over to a random page and shoved it across the table and said, instead of like, "Who's this?" she said, "Who's that?" and pointed at the magazine photo. And it was a picture of the Marlboro Man, cowboy. And the guy sitting across the table from her looked down at the photo and said, "That's Fred." And she was shocked because, first of all, he responded to her question. And then she sort of went, "Fred who?" And he said, "Fred Astaire." And then she said, "Where does Fred live?" And then an amazing thing happened. She and everybody around the table started singing all together. "Oh, Oklahoma, where the wind goes sweeping down the plain." And in that moment, she had it. She had what she was going to do with the rest of her life, which was develop this program called Time Slips, which is at its core, it's about valuing people, who they are, where they are, in the moment to moment of whatever that expresses itself. So it's not trying to change someone. It's not trying to evoke a long lost recollection. It's not even trying to find someone's personality that may or may not be what they recall. It's about you're a human being. And in this moment, you intrinsically have value. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be engaged. So she has this wonderful creative imagination kit where it's got these evocative photos, you might say, where it can be anything, it can be a picture of a person. And all you do is you just start asking open-ended questions,
Right.
like no wrong answers. What do you think this is? What is she doing? Who is she talking to? Where is this happening? And pretty soon you're telling a story, and you're storytelling like in a great theatrical tradition of storytelling. So that's a long answer to your simple question.
But that's a form of, I wanted to do this and give a little credit to, you may know the name of Teepa Snow. She is a giant in the cognitive world, dementia world, and it's about improv. So what you just described is a form of improv.
Mm-hmm.
So if you said, who's this? And you say, if you show somebody the picture of their father, you say, who's this? And they say, Fred. No, it's not Fred. Who is this? It's your father, right? No. So there are no wrong answers. And again, we're talking more later stage issues. If you try to tell it can be in any context. A lot of times somebody will say, I want to go home. They're sitting in their house and they'll say, I need to go home. If you say, no, you're home, that person's not home at the moment.
No.
Sometimes all it takes is to go outside and come back in. Teepa has a film where she's in a memory unit and they're in the meeting room, and a patient comes in, not a patient, but a person who lives there, had been a maid. She has a brush in her hands. This person's whacking the bottom of the chairs, just hitting them hard. Well, Teepa can figure out she's cleaning. And she said, wow, what a good job. You're cleaning so well. Here, this is the last chair. You'll be finished right here. Right? And so she stopped, telling her to stop doing that. You're not going to,
Yeah.
and congratulates her on finishing a great job. And then they go have lunch, and she says in the video as they're on the way out, and we stop by the restroom because she's a little bit incontinent. but the yes anding of these things, I sometimes wonder if that other place that people are in, which I may be in at one time soon, I don't know, or one time, isn't real. We think it's not because we're not there. Somebody isn't there either. There's someplace else.
Yeah.
I don't know that we know what that is.
Yeah.
And in the moment, we can fight and argue, but so the project that you just described is, among the other things, you can see that it engages the person in something. They don't just sit there and you don't tell them you're wrong. It's the world they, quote, make up or create is a creation. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Now, we're in a world that is still a bit tied to end stages. And, I'm obviously early stage. I can have this conversation. Things are changing for me. My ability to lose phrases or just common words, what is this, what's it called, is increasing. I know it gets frustrating. So from my end, just to, it often comes in the part of the talk back, it's often called Alzheimer's agitation, but it's agitation for anyone trying to get because there's another word for it, or that you can't do it. Of course, the agitation increases when what we just at the other side of that is, what it is, or you're wrong, or, rather than helping. But doing it as part of a theater program, this is where I want to get back to, and thank you. And I hope using this platform a little bit can help get the word out to other theaters, to think about this and how to incorporate a program. And it is a theatrical, it is art. function to do. I had the fortune of performing in Los Alamos, in the senior centers there. The director there, Jackie Gruninger, is a person for whom I was her first boss as a young lady. She saw what I was doing, and now she's running a big senior center. We were there, but what we did the next day was also hold a writing workshop for caregivers and people with cognitive issues, so that you can write your stories and you get both sides of it, the caregiver and the person. I can write. People tell me, "Oh, you don't have it." That pisses me off usually more than anything else. So you should be in the back end of this thing, my friend. And by the way, just for the record, because I do this, I've had 3 diagnoses and I'm amyloid positive, and I've been in a drug trial. I have Alzheimer's, but I'm early stage, and even Parkinson's will be early or various stages. And the arts and theater, it's not just for them too, because I'm sure that their work can work well for audiences, and I still can get on stage. So I really appreciated you inviting me and seeing this, and meant to be, right? Because none of it was planned. That's what I also love.
That's right. Right.
But Playhouse Square, I hadn't heard of it. It gave me a tour. Now, some famous person grew up there, right? Who was that?
In Playhouse Square?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was with Great Lakes Theater, Tom Hanks is probably their most famous intern,
Yeah.
as far as that goes.
Yeah. You saw me place. Oh, and there was one other thing that I've used occasionally. One of the dressing rooms. Yul Brenner, I remember this.
Right. I showed you the Yul Brenner room.
Yeah. Now, so for anybody that doesn't know, Yul Brenner was apparently a bit phobic about cleanliness. And so how do you make sure the dressing room is clean enough? Well, you're a star enough so that you insist to be repainted. And what color was it? Green?
It was like green or yellow. I can't remember the exact color, but I remember like someone telling me the story that, Yul Brenner demanded that his dressing room be yellow or something. That is the strangest color. But because they literally had to clean the dressing room to paint it, that was his way of saying he really had to make sure it was clean. So smart, so clever. So many good stories in these theaters.
Listen, I know people will only listen to this for so long. Maybe we'll come back and do more later. But I wanted to thank you, and I want to congratulate you on the program that was able to be implemented. And I also have a big memory is that I had not been to Playhouse Square before, and as we're coming in, I know this had to be you. There was maybe 20 school buses.
Yeah.
From bringing kids to do it. This is so important in theater and is teaching. So thank you so much, Daniel. And I think people can just go to your website for the theater, and if they can look things up, and it's, I guess,
playhousesquare.org, yeah, just playhousesquare.org. And if you want to see some of the good work we're doing, click on education and you'll see some of the fun stuff.
And maybe learn about things that they can bring to their venues, besides bringing Dementia Man.
That's right. There's a lot going on.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you, Sam.